Living my bucolic life, we every city stripe. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and put the horses in through the barn, and time to move them out again. Red parchment pastures, beautiful farmhouses, the view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello. Alright, so we're going to start another adventure today, and what it's going to be is sewing the skirt. Oh, look at that hair. Oh, well, you know. Anyway, sewing the couture skirt, and this is going to be our pattern. It's a book. Okay, it's a book by Claire Shaeffer. Where's her name? Down here, Claire Shaeffer. And if you're at all interested in making this, I would recommend you buy the book. It comes with a DVD. In the back there's a DVD that goes more, basically it's her talking through what they took still pictures of in the book. So it's nice to see. I had to scramble to find a DVD player, but I found one, so we're good. Now, the pattern that you're going to make is, you have to have another pattern that already fits and that already is tailorable to her method. And this is the one that I was using, and you've seen it made. I made it up already, and this suit is going to be for my daughter, and the skirt that I made up of this pattern fit her well, so I'm good. I have the okay all clear that fits, so I can take it a step further. I would not recommend you even get started with this process until you have made up a test garment out of your pencil skirt, straight skirt pattern, and know for sure that it fits well. Okay, so with that aside, we're assuming everything is good. So I just want to give you a little opening of what I have here, what my materials are, what her intro to the book is, and everything, so that we can get started. So I'm not going to obviously read the whole book because that would be too much. Copyright issues, everything else, but I just wanted to give you a quick look. The main point of the skirt that we're making, the main focal point of it, is that it has a wrap front, so that's why she's showing you here what it looks like in the wrap front, and it's made in a very special way, so there's no bulk up here. And so here again, it's showing that wrap front. Now the waistband is normal, it's like a mock wrap, it's not a wrap it like a wraparound skirt thing. It looks like it, but it's not. So like here's another Chanel skirt that has that wrap front. And so she's going to go through and explain different fabrics that you can use, all different kinds of things. The fabric that I am going to be using for this is this one. It is, I would call it a Dusty Rose peach mix, okay? I don't know what it's coming off like in your computer. So somewhere between reality to my camera, to my computer, to your eyes, it probably has changed color. But in real life, it looks like a burned rosy peach color with white mixed in, and it's really pretty. So that's what I'm going to be using. It's fairly stable, and a lot of the fabrics that the Chanel skirts are typically made out of are a fairly loose weave, so I think that I should be fine. She gets into linings and trims. Now she is going to suggest silk for a lining. Let's see if she has it listed here. Yes. She says, telephone. She says that she prefers lightweight silk crepe, China silk, charmeuse, things like that. And I was looking into it, and some people said that silk stains, and whatever I make in the skirt, I'm going to be making in the jacket in the future also. And that one thing that they were saying is sweat stains are very prominent in silk. I don't have a lot of experience with that, but I'm taking their word for it. I'm going to be using my Bimber Grand, and it's still a high quality lining. It's still very soft and everything, and I have it. So I'm going to be using it. I think that it's going to be a nice lining. But just know that what she would be recommending is real silk, charmeuse, things like that, you know. And then I had seen in some other places that to stabilize the fabric, they would put the layer of their fabric, a layer of organza, and then the lining if their fabric really needed to be stabilized. So while I was grabbing my materials, I grabbed some nice crisp organza. So I have it on hand. As I was looking over her book this morning, she does not specify it. She specifies taking some strips of organza to use as stays in different places. So I'll keep it handy for that, but I don't think that she wants, and I'm going to try to follow her book as closely as I can. I don't think that she's actually wanting to line the fabric itself with the organza. So I will put that aside. And then she gets into trim. And it seems to be a discussion in skirts, because if you put a specific trim on a skirt and you don't wear it with a jacket with that trim, it somehow, I guess it's a fashion faux pas. But if you have a skirt that matches a jacket and the jacket has trim, so say I have a jacket like this, okay, that has trim on it, and I have a skirt that has trim on it, the same. Those two can be worn together. But if I decide to wear a different jacket, can't do it. But if I wear this jacket that has the trim with the skirt that matches the fabric but no trim, then I'm free to wear this skirt with other things, is what she's saying. So because of that, I am probably not going to be putting a lot of trim on this skirt. I haven't decided yet. This is the trim that I actually got. It's a nice big gimp. You know, it's actually a fairly wide gimp. And so for what, the only thing I would be doing is, and she demonstrates it quite a lot, is using the selvage edge, which has a bit of fringe on it, and overlaying the gimp with the selvage edge. So if I do decide to trim the skirt, that's what it's going to look like. But I haven't gotten there yet. I have a little time to figure that out. But I just wanted to show you, because when I do make the jacket, that's the trim that I will be making on the jacket also. So, putting this aside into my box of materials, and this over here. So anyway, she wants you to be thinking of your fabric, your lining, your trim, okay? So now we're going to get into the pattern, the perfect pattern. And again, here is the skirt that has that overlap. And it's kind of debatable how far the overlap is going to go. It looks like some of them might be overlapping, you know, just barely off center. And then some are almost all the way to the side seam. And what she is saying is that it is up to you how far you're going to overlap it. And here she is, you know, demonstrating where to do that. So when we get to that point, I'll show you. So with all that being said, move this book out of the way. Let me tell you what my first couple steps are going to be. This is my pattern that I have made that fits this one, okay? And this is what I am going to be using to make her pattern. I don't want to destroy this, and I need to mark it up a whole lot. So I'm actually going to clear my table, put these down, put a piece of tracing paper on top of it, and I'll show you how I'm going to be changing them. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is make a copy of my skirt. So I just put my front and back, that's the only pieces I'm worried about here, onto my work table. I have this big piece of tracing paper that I can see through, and I'm just going to tape this down so it's not going to move while I'm working here. So I've got it taped down. I've got my square ruler, I've got my tape, and I'm using this tape because it is 5/8 of an inch wide, which is the seam allowance that this skirt has built into it. And I need to make a pattern that does not have any seam allowance in. So the first thing is I have to look and see if it's on a fold or not. The front piece over here is on a fold. So I don't need to cut any off of there. So I can just go ahead and make my straight line. Right up here, all the way down. Okay. Okay, so now I've got my front, my center front marked, that's a start. Now I need to do the top. Now the top has a seam allowance on it, so I am going to be tracing it without that. So I am just lining up the top edge of my measuring tape with the top edge of the pattern, and then using the other side of my measuring tape kind of as a straight edge. Okay, and just taking that all the way across. Every time there's a little angle, I'm going to follow that angle because there's some darts in there, and I need to make sure I keep those darts nice and true. Okay, so I have my top seam allowances taken out, and now I'm going to be coming down the sides. So there's one thing I need to work on with this pattern, and I'm just going to have to use my measuring tape because I wasn't really careful to make sure that my pattern pieces lined up with my grid, which I should have, and if I ever do this again, I will make sure my straight is exactly on the straight of my grid. But we can get around this. So again, on these coming down here, I am going to do the same thing where I am just tracing along the edge of my tape. I need to wash my tape. I have marks all over it to get that seam allowance. Now, here's my issue. You get to the hip area, and this skirt, the pencil skirt pattern I'm using, it doesn't go straight down. It actually kind of tapers in a little bit to get that really sharp little end. So what I need to do is make sure that at the widest point, when it gets to that widest point, instead of tapering in at all, I need to make sure it stays straight. So if at this point it's 11 1/8, I need to make sure that down here it's also at 11 1/8. And I don't know that you can see that. Okay, up here, 11 1/8, I'm actually going to need to bump it out about 1/4 inch at the bottom. It doesn't sound like a lot, but I want to make sure it's a perfectly straight skirt because that is the goal. So let me work on those two, and also on the back, the center back, I'm going to be taking the seam allowance out of that also. So I'm using my square here, and on my front piece, because it's on a fold, I can line up my square over here with that edge, mark the point where my new cutting line is without the seam allowance, move it down, making sure this is still on that fold, make a mark, move it down, making sure this is still on the fold, and make a mark. Okay, so now instead of just following along, I'm going to draw a line here, connecting all of those lines to get my cutting line. I'm just kind of guiding this in there. Okay, and what I'm also going to do is I'm going to draw my bottom edge. My bottom edge includes a hem, and I could not tell from her book exactly if I'm supposed to include my hem or not, but I'm going to draw it on here, and I can tell on my hem where that line is supposed to be, and I think it was 1.5 inches hem. So I'll just make that line separate so that if, here you go. So I can tell there's a line here where it's supposed to be a fold line for the hem. So I'll draw that on also, so that if later I'm supposed to have it cut at that point, it's easy to make that cut. But I'm going to go ahead and draw my pattern all the way down to my original cutting line, including the hem for now. So the front, the outside perimeter of the front is pretty much done. The back, let's see how straight this back piece is. The back piece is actually straight. A lot of times they have it slightly curved. So that's actually going to make life a lot easier. I can just cut the back simply by marking my 5/8 inch mark down here and marking the 5/8 up here, right there, and then connecting them. Right here, and that makes it easier because now I can use my square also as I'm coming down the hip side of my back piece. So I'll do that the same way I did this, taking out the seam allowance until I get to the widest point, and then at that point making sure I have it perfectly straight, coming straight down. So what we need to do is basically cut where our darts are. And if you remember when I altered this for Jessie, I shortened the darts. So they are much shorter than they used to be. So I'm going to draw these in. There's one. Okay, so there's my 2 back darts, and then I also have 2 front darts, which I also shortened. Okay, I think I've got it all cut here. Now the last thing I'm going to do is draw my grain lines on, because that is important. Just do that, put a little arrow at the top and bottom so I know that's my grain line. And this doesn't have one because it was originally put on the fold, so I will line my little ruler up with the edge of that, you know, fold here arrow over here. So I'm going to draw that in and put an arrow at the top at the bottom, and I'm going to label on this one that it is the front because they're going to look very similar, and I'm labeling here that this is the back. Okay, and I think I'm ready now to cut out. So now I am just lifting my pattern paper, tracing paper up to move my patterns, just to make sure I don't slip up and cut them by accident. And I am going to cut my patterns without the seam allowance, just like we marked. And when you get up to the top here with the darts, you're going to cut out those darts. So get up to this point, cut in to the tip of the dart, just cut across here, it'll be easier. that out like that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out the whole thing, cutting out my darts. Okay, so now we're ready to start making our pattern. And she uses a 1-inch grid pattern paper. I have this stuff, you know, the red dot pattern tracing paper stuff. So what I'm going to do is just pull off a length of it. I need this to be fairly long because we're basically making one long skirt piece. So let me go ahead, cut off the length of it, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so I have discovered that the 1-inch grid of my tracing fabric stuff is not the same size as the 1-inch grid of my board. So the little dots cannot match up. So I'm just not going to let that bother me. I'm going to move forward, but if you see and it looks like things are wonky, I know. It's driving me a little bit nuts, but I'm not going to worry about it. Anyhow, I'm going to go forward. What I have to do is I'm going to start by placing my back, oops, this is a front piece, my back piece. Basically, the only place I have a real opening is in the back. So it says to place your pattern piece so it's vertically matched over here, and you have a couple inches to spare. And over here, you're making sure that it is also vertical. And, oh, so many lines. But anyhow, I think that that is fine. I'm just going to put a couple weights on it for right now, just to hold it down. And then the front piece is going to go right here, lining up straight with it. So this is one of the reasons why we need to make sure that this was a perfectly straight seam and not tapered in at all. So I'm going to put a few pieces down here also. All right, I'm going to use all my weights today. All right, so here's what we're going to do. This is going to become one piece. And she keeps saying, draw with a soft pencil. So I got my soft pencil, I got my pencil sharpener. I'm ready to do this, Claire. So up here, I'm going to be tracing along the edge. Oh, get up here. So that this part where the side seam is actually going to turn into a dart. Okay, so my pattern piece is actually going to have a line right here. Can you see that? Yeah, you can see that. Okay, so see this line here? This is going to be joined, and this is going to be a dart. And same thing up here. So I'm going to trace all around all of this and this at the top. And I believe I'm still going the bottom. I believe I still am including my hem. That's our hope. So let me do that, not this, and then we'll go to the next step. Okay, so I have this all traced around except for my center front. I have a little line coming down about 1/2 inch and up about 1/2 inch to mark where that center front line is. You know what, I'm going to go ahead and draw the whole line and just mark it. I think that's important. Doesn't mean I'm going to cut it, but I think it's important to have it marked. Okay, so I am going to write on here a C and an F for center front for my little line that I just drew. Now, we need to make the pattern for the overlap piece. And she leaves it up to your discretion how far you want it to wrap. On this pattern itself, this version is actually a wrap, and it comes to this point right here. All right, and I can see that position is right about where this point is right here. It looks like no, actually this point, because you can see the second dart sticking out from behind, but the first one is in the wrap area. So I like the way that that looks. That's the look that I am going to go for. So because of that, what I need to do is measure in how far that point is, and I'm going to have my wrap come this far, right about here, which is 5 3/8 inches. Okay, so what I need to do is extend this line out 5 3/8 inches, extend my bottom out 5 3/8. Get my big square here, because it's so much easier. So if I'm using this edge as my drawing edge, I can line this up right here. Should be 5 3/8. Just to make sure, I need to make sure that this bottom measurement here is the same as the top. And it is, so that's great. It doesn't look like it because, you know, dots aren't the same, which is driving me nuts, but that's okay. So with my soft pencil, I am drawing a line all the way up and also all the way across here, extending that hemline area over. All right, so this is my new edge. Now to get how to draw the waistline, what I need to do is take my front piece, and I have marked where my center front is, and flip it over. Can you still see me? Yeah. And I'm flipping it over and aligning the center front of my pattern with the center front line I drew on my spotty paper here. Okay, so right here, this line here is where the end of my wrap is going to be. So if I have this lined up, I'm just going to put some weights up here and extend this same position here. Okay, so now I have this drawn. This is my back, my front, and my lap. Okay, so this is going to be my main skirt pattern. And she's going to go straight into, and now cut out your fabric with this. I am going to take a slight detour and make a mock-up of this just to make sure all of this stuff up here is going to work and that my overlap is actually where I want it to go. So I'm just going to cut this out of a lightweight woven and make that up. So I just have an old sheet on here that I'm going to use for my mock-up. And it's doubled, so I'll cut two at the same time. So yeah, here we go. Now I need to remember there is no seam allowance on here, so I need to add that. Now up here at the top, I've got this little bitty piece of a dart, and I am toying with the idea, instead of doing that dart, just kind of pushing it over here and cutting this at more of an angle. And I think that's what I'm going to do for my mock-up, just to see if it works, because I think having a single dart over there by itself is going to be just problematic. Okay, so understanding that this is just a very, very rough mock-up, I just wanted to see how this is going to work over here. And so I have it matched up in the front where it's supposed to be. I have my side dart in the side. Okay, I have my back seam lined up in the back. So I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't totally whacked. I think that by omitting that last dart on my wrap and just bending it in and cutting it that way is going to be perfectly fine. This seam allowance is just going to actually be folded in like that, and it is going to be nicely placed towards the side, so I think that that's going to be okay. I just feel a lot better doing this, knowing what it looks like before I start cutting into my big fabric, and that's my next step. Okay, first time I did this I didn't have my mic on, so now we're good. So good morning, ready to start actually getting my skirt pieces cut out, and I'm excited because my mock-up fits fairly well, you know, so I'm getting the idea of how it's supposed to work. So this is going to be good. We're going to cut out differently. Now this whole process is going to involve some things outside of my usual comfort zone. This, my handy dandy pen, is off limits, unfortunately. So since I can't use my marking pen, everything's going to be thread marked, and she doesn't want you to use regular thread. She wants you to use like a light cotton, she calls it basting thread, but it really looks like a fluffy little yarn, and her whole point is that it snaps apart easily. I'm going to be using this, which is, you know, a funky old nylon yarn, but it is thin, you know, it is a thin yarn and breaks very easily. So that's what I'm going to be using. So I'm going to tip the camera down and show you how I'm going to cut this out. So the first thing about cutting out the pattern is that you don't actually cut out the pattern. What I'm going to be doing is cutting out a rectangle with a couple inches around on each side that my pattern is going to sit in the middle of. And even though we're cutting two of these, we do them individually. And that is so I can make double sure that everything is perfectly on grain. And I have a line here where I drew my center front line. And I can kind of use that to eyeball it on a predominant stitch line to make sure that I'm staying on grain. So what she says is we're going to cut this with a couple inches on each side. Now, I'm actually going to be trying to save my selvage in one continuous long strip. So before I actually cut this rectangle, I'm going to come down and on both sides clip off my selvage edge, just in case I decide to use that in my trim. So let me do that and I'll be right back. But one thing that's important to her is that you're always working with the same direction on your fabric, because if you can get the slightest variation from having something upside down, you don't want to risk that. So what she has you do is in the top right corner of every piece, you're going to mark a little thread X. So that's what I've done. I've just made a little X right up here, and I'm just going to clip that off. Stick my little marking needle back in my spool here, and I put a thread X up in the top right corner of my fabric that I just cut out so that I have that part done. Now I can move this. So you see it's right here. Hopefully you can see. I'm using gray marking thread on a dusty rose, so that's what it's going to look like. Okay. Okay, so the next thing, I'm going to try to use my big yellow pins so they'll mark better. I'm supposed to mark my center front line with a pin up here in my fabric. So just poking it straight down. And then we're going to pin the rest of this on, but she wants you to make sure that your pins are always going with the grain of the fabric, and that the heads are always set in from the edge at least 1 inch. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is outline with my gray breakable yarn marking thread the entire stitching line, which is the perimeter of my pattern. Make sure I get my little corner here set in the way I want. Once I have this done, then I can take this pattern off and cut out another one, you know, mirror opposite, and do the same thing to that one. So I'm just going to get started. And she says to take about 1/2 inch long stitches. So anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and continue with this, outlining the entire pattern, including the little darts. Over here, I'm going to be going up and down each of the darts, and just taking my time. Once I have this one done, I will get another piece of fabric, flip my pattern over, cut it out, outline it the exact same way, so next time you see me, I should have 2 pieces of fabric with the thread trace outline of my pattern on it. So just really quickly, I want to show you when you get to a corner, instead of just turning and heading south, what I'm doing is I'm trying to make sure I have some thread visible on the top. All right, so I'm going to come out beyond that corner, you know, 3/8, 1/2 inch, come up, like here's this side, so I'm going to come up right about here, okay? Let me turn my fabric here. So if I'm up here now, and I'm in line with where my new direction is, I can just come straight down like this. All right, so doing it that way, when I lift my pattern, I have a very, oh my goodness, I have a very sharp little point of intersection there, and it's very stable, and that's what's good for me. Come back. You are looking at the wrong side of my fabric. This is the right side, and I have already finished basting around my stitching line. So everywhere you see here, this is a stitching line. And I am going back with a piece of red thread to mark where my dart points are. This is the center back where the end of the zipper should be. At this point, let me raise you up here. At this point, I'm actually thinking of making one more little slight detour from the Claire Shaeffer method. And I want to explain what it is. If you remember, way back when I made the mock version of this, which was actually, you know, a full-blown jacket and lined and everything, I discovered that this fabric stretches a lot. And it's not 100% stable because it's a very big weave, you know. And she has in her method to add a stay, a stabilizing stay, but she doesn't add that until after the quilting is done and everything. And when I was watching her video, by the point that she got to that, it had stretched out of shape quite a bit, and so she was having to, you know, by hand go back and kind of try to ease it back together after all the quilting was in. And if possible, I want to avoid that. So I was debating with myself, do I go ahead and sew in the stay that I'm going to be making it out of the organza that I have, where you cut the selvage of the organza and make a stay. I will be doing that, but I think right now, just for temporary, for my own peace of mind, so that I can feel free to work with these pieces and not be afraid it's going to stretch out of shape, I am going to use a little bit of my iron-on stay tape just along the vertical outside edges, and I'm going to fuse it on just outside this stitched seam line, okay? With that, when I get to the point of putting this stay tape on, if it's going to bother me, I can, you know, peel it up because it is a fusible, or I can just leave it there and cover it with something else that's more permanent. But at least that way I'm going to feel good about that. So I'm going to go over to my ironing board and do that very quickly, just for my peace of mind. Okay, so the first thing I'm doing is matching up my pattern with my stitching line, just to make sure it's still the right size, and it is. If I showed you all the way down, it's still the right size, so I can feel confident with that. Put putting my pattern aside, I am using this stay tape. Okay. It is a very neutral color. I feel confident with it, so I am just going to fuse it on, and I'm going to try to fuse it so it's not actually touching my yarn. I have yet to iron my yarn, so this will actually be a good test for that. Move down here. And I'm just pressing straight up and down, trying not to misshape my fabric. And there it is. It's fused on. It's not visible from the right side, and I just feel better. So I'm going to do the other side, and I'm actually going to do it across. I'm just going to do the entire perimeter of this piece. And again, like I said, because it is fusible, if I really want to, I can come in later, grab it, and pull it off. I'll probably just leave it and overlap it with the organza later, but that's just for me, so I will be right back. All right, so the next thing I need to mark, and we're going to be doing a lot of marking here for a while, is I need to mark my hem. My hem fold is 1.5 inches above this basted marking line, okay? My bottom of my fabric where I have the dotted line is where I need to cut. On the sides and everything else where I have the dotted line is the stitching line, if that makes sense. That's what I'm going with right now. So the next thing then, with all of that said, is to mark the 1.5 inch hem. And I've been trying to wiggle out within myself how to do this with being true to her methods and getting my point across my way. And I think I'm going to have to do kind of a hybrid of marking and thread marking, because I think that it would be easier for me to go ahead and with my ruler, you know, right very lightly, now that I know I can iron this because I have my stay tapes and everything on, is very lightly mark where that 1.5 inch point is with this. And I think that, you know, she would probably use chalk, but I know that these are going to disappear. So I'm just making little dotted lines with this, and then I can come back with this and have a guide to follow to make this stitching line straight across. All right, so we are looking at the right side of my fabric now. And this is my bottom line, the cutting line for my bottom of my skirt. This is my hem line, that is the fold line for my hem. Now I need to make another line. I need to make it 2 inches above this one. And again, another one going all the way across. So again, what I'm going to do is on the wrong side of my fabric, lightly, or maybe not so lightly, mark it with my pen. And the reason I don't want to just rely on my pen is because you can only see it on one side. And these you're going to be able to see from both sides. And very, very quickly, I'm going to be layering linings and things here. So this side won't even be visible if I want to. It'll be covered in lining. So this is the side that I need to make sure all the markings are visual. But this is the side that I feel comfortable using my pen to give myself a general look at where I need this line to be, so that I can then come back and thread mark it with my yarn. Okay, so we are looking at the wrong side, trying to stable the camera. Okay, so we are looking at the wrong side here. This is my bottom, the two that I just basted in, and the line I need to draw now is this center line. And remember, I have a pin. This is the right side, and on the right side I have a straight pin marking it up here and down here. So with those two, I should be able to just connect them. Ooh, my ruler's not long enough. Let me get a longer ruler. So with that, I should be able to just put the edge of my ruler alongside those pins and draw that line also. Now this line is going to go the entire distance of up all the way down to the bottom edge. And the quilting lines are going to come shorter and just stop here. And so I suppose that's a way to tell a difference. At this point, I'm really wishing I had a different color breakable marking thread that I could do my center front in a different color, but I don't. And I was thinking about maybe embroidery floss, but it's even too strong for me to be able to break easily, I think. Let me go try again. Nope, embroidery floss will not break. So I am going to continue with this, marking my center front on both of my pieces. So in my quest to find a contrasting marking thread, I found a very old spool in my collection of old spools of thread, which is usually just for display, but look, oh yeah, that breaks easily. So, good to have ancient thread around, I guess. So I am going to be using this doubled. I think if it's doubled, we'll be able to see it better, to mark my quilting lines. Okay, so if you don't know, quilting is the way that they attach the lining to the fabric. It's kind of like a method of underlining, but instead of just going around the edges, you're actually quilting it through the center also. So the entire thing is one big piece. There's no chance for it to get wonky between the quilt layer, between the outer fabric and the lining layer, okay? And if you're using a patterned fabric, you can adjust your quilt lines so that it goes along with the print on your fabric. That is 100% fine according to Claire Shaeffer. Okay, so I have you up high enough. I think you can see what I'm doing now. There is a line right here that is my center front line, okay? This right here is my center back. This is the overlap, and I need to start my quilt placement. So just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to start placing them every 2 inches because that is how wide this ruler is. So that makes sense to me. So down at the bottom here, I am going to just put a pin. I'm going to try to use these big yellow ones so you can see. Every 2 inches, just to see how that is going to line up. Okay, so right along here I have a row of little yellow headed, flower headed pens, and those are every 2 inches, and that is my preliminary idea for quilt line placement, and I think it's going to work. What that's doing is giving me 1 inch between this last pin and the edge over here for my center back, and about 1 inch from this pin and the edge of the overlap. And I think that's fine, because if this is 1 inch apart, when I have the 2 different center backs butted up together, that's going to be putting quilt lines 2 inches apart. So I think that's good. So what I'm going to need to do is put 2 inch spaced lines that are going to stop at this row here. So there's the very bottom edge. There is the first basted line, which is my cutting line for the bottom. The second one, which is my hem fold line. And the third one up here, which is the line where my quilt basting stops. And I need to draw these lines straight up all the way. So just like everything else, it is easier for me to flip it back over to the wrong side here and being able to go ahead and with my pen draw these lines with my pen that I can erase, and I will erase first, and then come back with my red thread. So let me go ahead and draw these, and I can see with my little pin heads underneath there where they should be. So I am just using my square, and I'm squaring up my fabric, but at the same time I want to make double sure that I am on grain. So if you need to shift like 1/16 of an inch one way or another, now is the time. Okay, so I'm starting with that one in the middle, so it basically draw it from this point all the way to the top. And I'm going to continue drawing it first every 2 inches, and then using my ancient breakable red thread doubled to baste those lines. So just about done with this, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to show the full effect of basting one long quilting row. So you can get the idea of how much time this takes. Plus I thought it would be good. So first thing I do is I'm getting a thread that is more than twice the length that I need because I'm doubling it. And everything takes longer on camera. And then I'm making sure my tails are sticking out on the right side. But I don't have a knot on it, so I gotta make sure I don't pull too hard. And for these quilting ones, I'm trying to make the stitches on the wrong side shorter in general, and the stitches on the right side longer. So it's more like a long stitch like that, okay? And so I'm just working on a flat surface here, taking a stitch, because if I try to take more than one, my needle's not happy. And even though I'm working with a thin yarn, I'm still using my yarn needle. And that is because with the yarn needle, it kind of pushes the fibers to the side, and I have these big yarny kind of things here. And that way, I'm thinking that it'll be easier to pull the stitches back out, because instead of splicing those yarns, if I'm kind of going next to them, it should be better, you know. It's not to say I'm not ever splicing any, but that's the goal. So I'm just working my way down, trying to pull it, but not so hard that I pull it out. Still sewing. This is so exciting, I know. I think showing this entire stitch violates so many theories on video production. I think something that hit me, well, there's a couple things that hit me, is a long time ago I saw a video. It was a slow TV video, and that was a new concept to me. And it was these women in Iceland or Ireland, or I don't remember where they were. But the entire video was them starting shearing a sheep, and then made yarn, and then knitting a sweater, all in one thing. And it was a very long process of just people making things. So I think the entire thing, it was like an 18-hour video or program, and it got all these viewers because it was just so long but peaceful. All right, so I'm ending with the yarn coming out this way. I'm clipping it so I have a tail about 1 inch or so long, and then I'm going to go back and iron this to erase all of my markings. So this one I did, and I have already erased my markings. This is the wrong side. So you can see everything is marked. So when I flip it over, this is what it looks like on the front. And it seems kind of strange to be so proud of getting to the point where you actually have your pattern marked, because usually with me, with my straight edge ruler and my pen, I'm just wonk, 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 and it's all done. But this actually, it feels like an accomplishment. So with that, I think that's good enough for this episode. And the next one, we'll get started with easing all the darts and things together, because that's a whole different topic. So this is going to be another journey, but I wanted to start with the skirt before the jacket. because a lot of the same techniques that we're going to be using with the skirt will be carried over to the jacket, but it seems like this is a much more simplified pattern. So the whole concept of laying things out, thread marking things, getting them ready to be quilted, quilting, easing, things like that. It's easier to practice on it and get the whole rhythm of it on the skirt. And then once this is all done, then we'll move forward. So I will see you next time. Bye-bye.